All right, so the SD Gundam game that I reviewed a while back caused a lot of burnout. So I'm kind of doing another one of those unscripted vlog things with a whole bunch of random thoughts ahead. So let's get started. Right after finishing the SD Gundam game, I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to play. I kind of flitted between a whole bunch of different games that I was always a little bit interested in, but were a little bit smaller. I first played Aztez, which was pretty cool. It's got like a combination of side-scrolling beat 'em up and like board game combination going for it. You're basically playing as an Aztec like warrior trying to conquer territory and then later on beat off a Spanish conquest. But it's one of those games that has a high randomization element. It gets harder as you go on. You're supposed to fail a lot, kind of like a roguelike. It wasn't really what I was looking for, especially because I wasn't looking to play another strategy video game so soon, so I bounced off of it really fast. But it is cool, and I recommend checking it out, but it just kind of left me a little bit unmoored to an extent. I then said, hey, you know, there's a couple of pretty critically enjoyed roguelikes that I haven't tried, like Faster Than Light and Enter the Gungeon, so I gave both of those a shot. And they're neat, but I was also left really unsatisfying. Like Aztez, those two games don't have progression systems, and progression can sometimes feel really slow and or arbitrary. Like in Faster Than Light, you have to meet certain conditions to unlock new ships, and sometimes even when you try to do your best to accomplish those conditions, the chances of you actually unlocking them doesn't feel like you can learn where you messed up, what you can do better. It feels really random, even if you do put a lot of effort into trying to achieve these goals. And in Enter the Gungeon, you buy new weapons and items that can drop within the Gungeon itself, but you can't actually modify the starting dudes. At least I wasn't able to get to a point where I could modify the starting dudes. I read into the wiki that you could eventually unlock an elevator rat or something that can take you to a different floor and give you some like a random assortment of items, but I could never unlock him or find him. And I got like 3 floors deep several times, so I'm not entirely sure where or what he did. After that experience, I kind of thought that, hey, maybe I don't actually like roguelikes, or at least designs that really lean heavily into the roguelike randomization element. It just felt like these games that are designed to be a little bit quick or a little bit more random and have a whole bunch of replayability weren't exactly for me. But then I played Synthetic, and hot damn, that game's actually like Enter the Gungeon if it was punishingly difficult. And while I'm not normally a fan of that game design philosophy, Synthetic kind of really pulls through because it does feel like as you progress and as you keep going and as you keep playing, you unlock more and more ways that you can tailor the experience to yourself. That made something kind of click for me. I really appreciate the ability to dictate play on my own terms rather than the terms of intense randomization for something like Enter the Gungeon. Like in Synthetic, you have a whole bunch of different classes that you unlocked at the start, but also eventually you can unlock different skills and abilities and starting loadouts for those weapons. You can also influence the probability of certain items appearing and how powerful those items are. You can also like modify difficulty with a whole bunch of different run affixes. Basically, it's all really cool in terms of systems. It kind of got me super engaged, and I really enjoyed my time with Synthetic, and I recommend people check it out. That game is eventually going to get like a console port, and I played it on controller with PC, and I thought it was pretty great. Even though it is super punishing, it's definitely one of those games. It's all like get good Dark Souls-y, and yet I found it more inviting and more interesting than the more traditional like, here's this random dice roll of a situation that we're going to throw at the wall to you. Maybe you get lucky because we gave you a super sweet gun. Maybe we gave you sweet garbage that you can't even use or even want to use. Thought that was pretty cool. After all that, I picked up and completed Gears Tactics, and that game is hella cool. Definitely worth checking out if you're a fan of XCOM style turn-based strategy games. If you are a Gears of War fan and don't really care for turn-based strategy, I'm not entirely sure if this is like a good entry-level one, if only because there will be parts of the game, particularly the boss fights, that get real frustrating and feel kind of unfair, and that's like very atypical for the genre. at the very least from my experience. I would still recommend it, even if you're just like in it for the Gears lore. I don't really know much about the Gears lore, so I actually felt not lost, but I felt like there were bits and pieces I was missing, that when the story provided some piece of information or tried to capitalize on some twist, I felt like I'm missing something, or that the emotional beat wasn't landing for me because I just didn't really know the history of the previous games, or their characters. But other than that, the only other complaint I really have is the progression system feels kind of arbitrary. They have this weird like loot box based Diablo 2 skill tree hybrid mishmash thing going on, where you'll find treasure chests on the mission, and then after the mission's over, you'll open those treasure chests and get randomly rolled loot. That randomly rolled loot will be given to your various classes, and then once you're done leveling up your classes, you can equip it, and you can get skills for your classes in like a 4-part skill tree kind of thing. The only problem is that there's no control over what kind of loot you can get, and so you are entirely at the whim of RNG. And that's a huge problem because some pieces of loot are actually tailored to synergize with certain skills for certain classes. So you'll end up in a situation with say, you know, really cool grenade cooldowns, and you'll have a couple different characters you might have spec'd into grenades, but you'll only have one piece of the armor set, and some of them aren't even fully upgraded because you just haven't found the upgrade copy yet. And so that can feel like a little bit arbitrary, and is progression's kind of out of your control. But other than that, like, it has some of the best like moment-to-moment tactical decisions in any game that I've played in the entire franchise. It makes the bold decision of, one, not having any kind of grid. It's almost like truly free roam, kind of like those like a tabletop miniature game where you can just like, you know, you stretch out your ruler, you move your units in whatever direction so long as it's within the actual limit, range limit. And if you have actions, then you can take any action that isn't on cooldown, and the only thing that gets put on cooldown would be abilities like throwing your grenade or certain specialized melee attacks. So you're able to like attack as all three of your actions, and the game isn't necessarily balanced around having tankier enemies as much as it's balanced around having a larger number of enemies and a greater mix of enemies that you can like have to think about how you're going to prioritize them. It's super cool. I super like it. It's a really easy recommend. Definitely earned its 8 out of 10 average Metacritic score. If you are looking for a tactics game, especially one that's in line with XCOM, super easy to recommend this one. Go ahead and pick it up. If you're not, and you're thinking about getting into tactics games and you're interested in Gears, the only reservation I have as before is that there might be some ports that might feel a little bit unfair. Luckily, there is multiple difficulties available, so you could tone down the difficulty for the boss battles if they get to be a little bit too much for you. I definitely did that for the first boss, and then once the systems kind of started clicking for me, I went ahead and bumped it back up to the normal difficulty that I was on, and things kind of moved a lot more smoothly afterwards. Super cool game, super recommend it. It's really satisfying chainsaw noises out of 5. I don't know how to feel about Microsoft taking a software as a service approach to their new generation console strategy. It feels like a 4D chess move that no one quite understands the implications of. On the one hand, it's very consumer focused, which is pretty cool. I can play Xbox games even if I don't have an Xbox because a lot get ported to PC on day one. If I get an Xbox One release, then I also get a Series X version through Smart Delivery, and I might even get a PC version on top of that through cross-buy. Game Pass is also pretty dope, and it even pushed Sony to move away from the Stadia-like streaming towards downloads for PlayStation now, so I give a lot of props props for that. But a lot of people look at Microsoft's approach and just assume that they completely ceded the console war, even though they're still competing on that front and they're still trying to convince people to spend an, as of this recording, undisclosed amount of money for a refrigerator-shaped silicon tower. They're still selling controllers and still selling proprietary memory cards. They're still fighting the console war, so to speak, but they're just doing it in a really weird way. Either way, we've already seen ripple effects of this strategy. We have people openly questioning the point of a Microsoft console or even Xbox platform on PC if they can just buy their first-party exclusives day one on Steam. Cross-buy and Game Pass are great, but have awkward incentives with relation to the console hardware. If I don't have an Xbox but do have a strong PC, the Microsoft strategy makes buying an Xbox redundant, so I'm better off prioritizing a different platform rather than squeezing more value out of my Game Pass subscription or cross-buy titles. If I still don't have a powerful PC and you're looking for a new console, then you can instead maybe spring for a powerful Windows PC instead and not only have access to most new Xbox titles going forward, but also an infinite library of PC-only games. It kind of narrows the market to only people with the budget for a console and looking to have access to all third-party AAA games for the next 5 to 10 years. Sony doesn't have this same problem because they're much more brand focused and prioritize a Disney-esque protection racket on their games, even going so far as to minimize or eliminate cross-gen titles going forward. If you have a powerful PC, well, there's no guarantee that first-party Sony exclusives will make it to Steam. Horizon may be both the first and last title that they try this with. For the same reason, if you don't have a PC and you want to play Sony games, then getting a new PC won't actually help and you're still stuck picking up a PS5. This means that for the group outside of the only consoles budget, Microsoft has kind of accidentally made the decision between Xbox and PS5 a pretty easy choice in Sony's favor. The budget group has a more traditional choice to make based on preferred exclusives. At this point, it's a question of open world action adventure games versus shooters, but this is also where Game Pass's obscene value starts to work against itself. So Game Pass is super cool, and I think it's great that Microsoft is committed to putting all of their first-party titles in the platform on launch, but I think this is having knock-on effects on the market that Microsoft either didn't expect or didn't appreciate. A lot of people already push back at the idea of picking up a new $60 game because they'll just play it on Game Pass, and this could affect sales pretty harshly. Hell, when Phil Spencer said that Control and Cyberpunk 2077 would make it to Game Pass, both Remedy and CD Projekt Red publicly emphasized that the games wouldn't be on the service at launch, and that they had no further details as to when they'll ever make it on the service. When your partners have to play damage control in response to your announcement, then I think it points to some major problem. If Game Pass becomes a tipping point for someone to pick up the Series X, that's great, but that ironically means that they have no incentive to actually buy into Xbox exclusives, and can instead spend their budget on major third-party games that release on the hardware. Microsoft might think that's fine, but the monthly no-contract subscription means a sizable portion of the players will get in the habit of renting the latest exclusive for $15 on release rather than playing for their game. This actually happens with Netflix and is a big part of why they were moved away from being a library of the past towards new releases. Game Pass will inevitably move towards a model that encourages continued subscriptions for the service, and that won't impact what games get put on the service, but what games get made. Even Apple's own arcade initiative eventually abandoned the premium titles it started with and started moving towards titles with more traditional mobile mechanics in order to keep people around. Maybe this means we'll get 400-hour epics every month, but chances are Microsoft will shift its development strategy towards cheap-to-produce service titles to keep people around through monthly content updates. I don't even know how this will impact developers. The major publishers have already kind of sort of pushed towards making their own download and streaming services even before Xbox showed up, but they never really caught on. I don't know if they'll suddenly double down on the service or if they'll just latch on to the main platforms. Either way, Game Pass's success is going to have knock-on effects on the kinds of games that get made, and I don't think it's just for the best. Although maybe I'm just paranoid. Speaking of paranoid, I may sound like a hypocrite, especially given my essay in defense of the term Metroidvania and my call for more genre labels, but I feel the definition Drift we're seeing for the term prestige game is going to run into a bunch of problems. To give a little bit of context here, the term prestige game was coined by Doc Buford on his blog in order to suss out exactly why he doesn't actually usually enjoy a certain class of AAA video game. It's a riff on the TV genre prestige drama, which describes a class of show usually produced by HBO or AMC that have high production values and are considered serious television in scare quotes when compared to police procedurals or anime. This is stuff like The Sopranos and Breaking Bad. By extension, a prestige game is a video game with high production values, generally story focused, and also tries to appropriate the storytelling techniques of prestige television. Examples include Red Dead Redemption 2, The Last of Us, Detroit Become Human, and Uncharted. It generally excludes stuff like Assassin's Creed or Elder Scrolls or Call of Duty or Mass Effect. Most importantly, these games also tend to pitch themselves on the idea that they are grounded in TV, film, or literature as a way to signal that these games are quote-unquote more serious than other titles in the same genre. In other words, prestige games don't share mechanics, designs, or themes as much as they share production aesthetics and storytelling sensibilities. Which is fine if you want to talk about these shared features across otherwise wildly different games in an essay tailored to focus on those features. But things get weird as people pick up the phrase and start talking about it as a genre. Basically, from what I can tell, people have started talking about prestige games in a way that makes them independent from film and television as a kind of video game equivalent to prestige drama rather than a lens by which you can look at certain AAA games in relation to the mediums they appropriate. They've also started fudging the definition to include AAA games with generally agreed upon quality storytelling like Mass Effect and Dragon Age, while still excluding most games that take place in a Ubisoft or Bethesda-style open world, and almost all shooters that focus on a heavy multiplayer component. Now, all the way this phrase could be pernicious as a genre label could be their own essay, but the thing that's mostly on my mind is how the term prestige game effectively becomes a marketing genre, and one which, accidentally or not, crowns Sony king of the castle because they're the only platform holder that focuses on the kinds of AAA games that most naturally fit people's intuitive understanding of the phrase prestige game. Nintendo pumps out phenomenal games, but they have cartoony aesthetics while also steering clear of cinematic storytelling. Microsoft has Halo and Gears, but they're perceived as primarily multiplayer shooters with unrealistic art styles. Heck, even the newly acquired studios tend to shy away from photorealism and focus instead on cultivating unique looks for their franchises, with the only exception being Ninja Theory's Senua series. Only Sony is perceived as making photorealistic dramas. As a result, only Sony first-party studios will be perceived as making prestigious AAA games. Even if publishers like Rockstar or CD Projekt Red can pump out games once every console generation, they'll still be outnumbered by Sony's output over the console's lifetime, with almost every franchise not labeled Ratchet & Clank getting grandfathered into the genre. This, on its own, is really bad and can have knock-on effects on other parts of the industry. Hell, there are already a lot of bad faith actors who accuse various media outlets of bias one way or the other. If games journalism starts casually throwing around the term prestige game the way it's understood now, folks are going to notice, and that's not including the perception of games journalism being merely the marketing tool of large publishers. Use of prestige games should be limited to mostly dry academic discussions of the intersection between games and film, preferably in inaccessible scholarly journals or industry-facing blogs that can't get enough traffic to be monetized by ad sets. Casual proliferation of what amounts to a marketing term masquerading as a genre, especially by public-facing games media, can only cause problems, and I desperately hope that we reverse course or end up proven wrong. Thanks for watching.